So, what I wanted to delve into today, although it's a few days before Tisha B'Av, but this is a subject that I was asked by many people, and recently it was also brought up to my attention, a question, and it has to do with Safek Berachot lehakel, how in the Ma'arav, how in Morocco, where we mityaches to Safek Berachot lehakel. And particularly, I want to discuss the question. It's a fascinating question, and I think with this question, we're really going to be able to understand and highlight the difference between the psak of Chachmei HaMa'arav and the psak of the Edot HaMizrach, and where things differ. I think this question will bring it to light. So somebody brought to my attention from the Art Scroll Sidur that the Moroccan minhag should be that women, when they say the Birkot HaShachar, they should say the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono with Shem U'malchut. Whereas in the Art Scroll Sidur, like most Sephardic Sidurim nowadays, it's written that the woman should say Sheasani kirtsono belo Shem U'malchut, which is the psak of the accepted psak by the Sfaradim Edot HaMizrach. So they asked me, is it true that the Moroccan minhag would be that women say the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono? And it was very interesting because during this same period of time, I have been writing together with Rav Yosef Peretz Shlita, one of the preeminent Moroccan Talmidei Chachamim that we have, who lives in Panama, and we've been writing a kuntras of Klalei HaPsak, the guidelines of psak according to Moroccan Chachamim. According to Moroccan Chachamim. But my blue cord that's by my seat, my blue USB cord, it's in the wall. And therefore, I told myself that if already we're discussing the topic of Klalei HaPsak according to Chachmei Morocco, I think it's a very good opening to speak about this subject. I wrote this yesterday actually by the Hilulav Darizal HaKadosh, and we're going to see that it has to do a lot with the shita of the Arizal. Now, let's start with the question of Sheasani kirtsono. In general, the ruling of the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono, thank you, the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono is brought down in Siman Memvav. The Tur brings down that men say Shelo Asani Isha and women say Sheasani kirtsono. Correct? Second. So men say So men say Shelo Asani Isha, and women say Sheasani kirtsono. And the Maran HaShulchan Aruch brings us down as well in Siman Mem Vav, and this is the accepted halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, that women should say the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono. The Pri Chadash argues, and he says, I don't understand how you could say this bracha. This nusach bracha was not written in the Gemara, and any bracha that's not written in the Gemara, like Magbiya Shefalim or Somech Noflim V'Kayotze, Go'arin bo ad haka'ah. We scream at him until we have to hit him. And he says, Udelo ke'abach, and not like the Bach. So the Pri Chadash says, since it's a bracha that is not written in Chazal, we do not say this beracha. And the Chida brings that we say it with Lo Shem U'malchut, and the Ben Ish Chai as well in Parashat Vayeshev, and in Yosef Chai says this is the minhag by them, that they say Sheasani kirtsono belo Shem U'malchut. This is the accepted halacha by the Edot HaMizrach and the Sfaradim, a lot of Sfaradim Edot HaMizrach, based on this chida, not to say the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono, not to not say it at all like the Pri Chadash, rather to say it belo Shem U'malchut. However, someone brought to my attention that by Moroccan ladies, they saw by their grandmother, there's a sefer called Shesh Zar by Rav Shner Zalman Revach, Talmid Chacham in Eretz Yisrael. He writes in Chelik Bet Siman Aleph that he saw his grandmother doing it and he asked her, she said this was the minhag. Rav Meir Atiyah brings that this is the minhag. I actually had the zichut of being in the city of Fez 4 years ago, and my uncle, my cousin, Zichrono Livracha, he's within the year, he was very kind and he was part of the small community left there. He gave me a few very old sidurim, hundreds of years old, these sidurim. And in some of them, it was written explicitly the bracha, Sheasani, kirtsono, b'shem u'malchut. Also the sidur Tfilat HaChodesh is written, the original Sefer Tfilat HaChodesh is written also that the women say the bracha, Sheasani, kirtsono, b'shem u'malchut. And this seems to be that this was the halacha that women would do. Now, Rabbi Shalom Misas once told me, and he writes this somewhere, that you can never really determine what's a minhag based on women because the women basically didn't know how to read, and basically they would just go to the mezuzah and they would pray. They didn't know. A lot of them didn't do Berachot HaShachar. Now, that is granted that it is a ta'ana, but in our particular case, if the sidurim write it that way, and the poskim would have to be posek that way, as well as this is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. So if you don't know exactly what the minhag is, what do you do? So this is a very fundamental question. It looks like an easy question, it's very fundamental. We have something that is hard to determine what the minhag is. You could say, well, you can't bring a raya from women. So what do? You have Maran the Shulchan Aruch says to make the bracha, and you have the Chida who says Safek Berachot le'akel, not to make the bracha. What is the rule? So what's interesting is the following. This klal of Safek Berachot le'akel neged Maran is not a klal that we have found in the earlier writings of the Acharonim. The Chida mentions it, and others mention it after that. But in the original Ktavim of Chachmei Morocco, they never said the klal of Safek Berachot lehakel. And why should they? If we accept upon ourselves Dat Maran the Shulchan Aruch, Ben lehakel, Ben leachmir, and we were the first and the strongest and the very assertive of the Edot to accept Maran, why all of a sudden by Berachot are we going to be lenient? Now, there are those who say the reason why we're lenient on Safek Berachot lehakel is because saying the name of Hashem is Deoraita, Shem Hashem Lashav. That itself is a machloket. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Walid brings by Bracha She'eina Tzricha, it's Derabanan. And although in Maran it doesn't seem to be that way, it's a very, very big discussion. And there's proofs from a few of the Chachmei Morocco that this klal of Safek Berachot lehakel was not said until much later, until later generations. By the Moroccan Poskim, you only find the later Acharonim like Rabbi Yosef Mesas, Rabbi Baruch Toledano, Rabbi Shalom Mesas. They would be maskir this klal. But the earlier Poskim never evoked this principle. I can give a few examples. For example, when the talit falls, the Shulchan Aruch says you have to make a new bracha. If you take a look at the Kaf HaChaim, he says Safek Berachot lehakel, and we don't. But Rabbi Rafael Berdugo in Torot Emet, one of the great earlier Moroccan Chachamim, writes, most definitely we say a bracha like Maran. He doesn't say, maybe you should say Safek Berachot lehakel. He says, that's the din, Hachi Kai Malan. Also, when you take off your talit, and you want to wait for a few more hours to put it on, he says to make a bracha. There too, a lot of poskim say Safek Berachot lehakel. He says, absolutely not. Pashat talito, you have to make a new bracha. Says Rabbi Baruch Toledano, also Shufre de Yosef. There's a few poskim regarding talit that say across the board that you don't evoke Safek Berachot lehakel, and you'll see nowadays the poskim use it very freely. I could go on with other examples, but I want to get into a different point. Since we have over here a question whether we will make a bracha or not make a bracha, people get very scared. They hear all of a sudden, well, Safek Berachot le'akel, against the Shulchan Aruch. Over here, you have the Rishonim said to make a bracha. You have the Abu Draham, the Tur, they all said to make a bracha Sheasani kirtsono. The Pri Chadash brings, I've never heard of making such a bracha when they are not written in hazal, which we'll get to in a moment. But al panav, it's not like Shitat HaShulchan Aruch is mechudash, and you have all the poskim against him. Here you have the Shulchan Aruch and the Rishonim, and you have the Pri Chadash, and therefore the Chida and others went like that also, to evoke the klal of Safek Berachot le'akel against the Shulchan Aruch. It's very mistaber that the Moroccan Rabbanim would say, we go al Ikar Adin. And especially when we don't know what the minhag is, we should definitely rely on Ikar Halacha. This is a very important rule because it's applicable in many cases. There's a discussion in the Sdei Chemed, do we apply Safek Berachot le'akel even on the minority poskim? Let's say you have a minority of poskim that say not to make a bracha. Are we choshesh for minority poskim? So if you take a look at the Kaf HaChaim, in many instances he is. But Maran HaShulchan Aruch, if he says something and most poskim go like him, there's no doubt that the Moroccan Chachamim would say that this is the halacha, whereas the poskim of Edut HaMizrach are going to say, well, you're going to go for the minority halacha. But not only that, it seems to be that the earlier Moroccan Chachamim understood that even if it's a Safek HaShakul, or even sometimes it's not a Safek HaShakul, they will not always be posek, they will not say Safek Berachot le'akel against the Shulchan Aruch. In the later generations, it became more common. But definitely the original psak of the Chachamim wasn't this way. That's why I think that the Sidurim and the Tevilat HaChodesh and others wrote that the women say Sheasani kirtsono, and it never changed, and there was never a reason why it would change. And nowadays, I think that it's a davar barur that women should say the bracha of Sheasani kirtsono, and that should be written in the Moroccan Sidurim. Okay, now based on this, I want to get to the actual ta'ana of the Pri Chadash, which is a fascinating subject. I hear my chavruta over here, Shlomo Miller, that I learned it together with him, and I'm going to tell you there's some fascinating chidushim over here, because this klal of not saying a bracha after Chatimat Talmud, the Pri Chadash seems to have a very strong ta'ana. Where is he getting it from? Where's he getting it from? What's the shita of the Rosh we're going to see, and what's the shita of the Shulchan Aruch? That's what I want to discuss with you today. So the Rosh writes in Masechet Kiddushin, Perek Kama da Siman Mem Aleph, regarding the bracha of Pidyon Ben, when a mitzvah of Pidyon Ben, says the Rosh, Tikun Geoni, the Geonim were mitaken lesidure minhaga de Padvana ubrichat adile umevarech kahana Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kidesh uber imo. That the Geonim were mitaken, that the Kohen should make a bracha asher kidesh uber imo. V'nagu levarech bracha zu beratzot halalu, and in this land they would make the bracha, but in Safrat and Ashkenaz they didn't make this bracha. Shelo matzinu velo matzinu shemavachin shum bracha shelo niskro b'mishnah. We have not found that we make any bracha. We make any bracha that's not written in the Mishnah or in the Tosefta or in the Talmud. Because after Rav Ashi and Ravina, lo matzinu shenitchatsha bracha. And in Masechet Bechorot, he adds on the following, and listen closely. He says, not only that, v'chein mistaber, a Kohen is not doing a mitzvah. Hooray, he's just getting the money, mekabel matanot. He's just getting the money. But the Kohen's not really getting the bracha, he's getting the silver coins. Right? Kohanim like silver. And not only that, then he says, also, lo matzinu shenitchatsha bracha. So here in Bechorot, he adds on a second reason. So all the Acharonim ask that there's a glaring stira in the Rosh. The Rosh in Masechet Ketubot talks about somebody who's bo'el a bitula for the first time. The Bahag writes, there's a bracha, a beautiful bracha that said, Asher tzag egoz began Eden, and he made the inyan of betulim, and you make this bracha. And if you think that he means below Shemu Malchut, look at the Turin, Even Ha'ezer Siman Samech Gimel, he says, no, you make it with Shemu Malchut. Maran HaShulchan Aruch was posek, you say it b'Shemu Malchut. Asks the Taz, the Bach, Knesset HaGdola, Korban Nitanel, everyone asks, it's a stira. In Masechet Kiddushin Shel Birkat Pidyon Ben, you don't make a bracha that's Nidchat Shabbat Talmud. And all over here, Asher Tzage goes, which is no place in the Talmud. The Bahag brings it down. All of a sudden, you make a bracha. Very big problem. The Taz writes in Orach Chaim Siman Mem Vav, En leyashev kushya zu ela kazu. That's how he says. There's no way to answer but this way. That's how he says it. There's no way to answer but this way. That if it's something that there was a minhag already to say it, so we're not going to be mavatal it. But to start a new bracha, that we're not going to. So he says, by the Birkat Betulim, they would do it already. Okay, but it's not niskar anyway. What the Taz's answer is difficult because it's not written anywhere that they were doing it and therefore they're allowed to continue. Either you're allowed to do this bracha or you're not. So the Knesset Agdola and the Korban Netanel and also the Chida brings this down, also Mara Yehuda Ayash brings it down, that in Knesset Agdola is in Hilchot Pidyon Ben Siman Shin Hey, that by Pidyon Ben there was two reasons. One, that the Kohen's not doing a mitzvah, and also Lo Matzinu Shinit Chadsha. There the Rosh is posek, not Beloshov Malchut. Whereas by Birkat Tzage goes, it's only one reason, so that you can make a bracha. Also, that's difficult because the Rosh writes explicitly this rule: Lo matzinu shenitchatsha bracha achrei hazal. So all of a sudden, what happened? The Bach also, he says maybe Asher Tzage goes is without Shemu Malchut, but as we mentioned, it's not written that way. He said Ta'ut Sofer. To say Ta'ut Sofer is also difficult. So we really put in some effort to try to find out what is Shitat HaRosh over here. And B'siyata Dishmaya, I think we have we could suggest a different approach. And this approach, I first want to be magdim a question of the Korban Netanel and add on a few of my own questions. Number one, it's written in the Korban Netanel that the Rosh brings the bracha of Kriyat Shema, Birkat Kriyat Shema, Hamapil. I'm going to bring you on a little bit of a journey now in the world of halacha, where we make a bracha that's not written in Chazal. Number one, Birkat HaMapil. We don't make it B'Shemu Malchut, Birkat HaMapil. We say B'Shemu Malchut, even though it's not written in Chazal. So, and the Rosh all of a sudden didn't say anything over there. By the bracha of Yir'u Enenu, the Rosh in Masechet Berachot brings Tikkun Rabbanan Batrai. That means it was not written in Chazal, this bracha of Yir'u Enenu. And the Rosh brings down this bracha. Remember, we had a shir about it. The Baruch She'amar brought down in the Shulchan Aruch also. And the Bet Yosef brings this Yir'u Enenu. It doesn't say it's a problem because you're not making a bracha shelo tiknu Chazal. So you have kama v'kama places that the Rosh himself, like Yir'u Enenu and Kriyat Shema, that he had no problem on brachot that are not written after Chazal. So why some places he's machbir, one place he's not? It's mamash. It's a big stira. So I want to suggest the following: that the Rambam in Hilchot Berachot Perek Aleph Halacha Hey writes like this. Where did the brachot come from? Nusach kol brachot ezra bedinot tiknum ve'en ra'ui leshnotan ve'lo lehosif al achat mehem ve'lo ligroa mehem. So all the nusach brachot, Ezra was mitaken. So there's a sefer I found called the Pnei Mevin from Rav Netanel Fried. He was an Av Bedin in a city called Ivrich in Europe. It's next to Munkach, I think. He has a skamot from Munkach. And he writes over there in Orach Chaim Siman Hey, says, I don't know, the Rambam in Hilchot Kriyat Shema says a little bit different. That Ezra was tiken also to the brachot. So why over here in Hilchot Berachot he says only mitaken the nusach? So says the Pnei Mevin, it's obvious, pashut, that we always would make berachot. From the time of Shmuel HaNavi, we would make berachot. Like it's written that Shmuel was mivarech ala zevach, and before Ezra, people would be mivarech on every Hanayin mitzvah. Comes along Ezra, and he was taking the exact nusach. Certain Chod Rabbanan, Chachamim were mitaken from the beginning. But the actual musag of brachot, that's in Hilchot Berachot, it was always there. And the Rashba also is mashba that way in Cherek Dalet Siman Resh Tzadei, that tiknu lem leIsrael brachot v'tivlot kedushot ve'avdalot lav ikran shel dvarim mamash ki amar de bracha amrin deoraita la ikran dvar Torah, and the nusach bracha is the Rabbanan. So there's always a musag of saying a bracha. So it could be according to this, like this, that we found the geonim or mitaken brachot, The Meiri writes in Masechet Berachot, and this is the Lashon, Rasha'im gdolei ador letaken nusach bracha me'ikara af al pi shelo nitkana. The gdolei ador have the right to be mitaken the nusach bracha, which means when there is a siba and there is enough of a reason that the bracha should be done. And what's the pshat siba? When I say like as a dugma ke'en deoraita tikun, when they found a smach that there's enough of a reason to make a bracha, then they were mitaken. Then the geonim were mitaken the nusach. But if there's no original siba, then they're not going to be mitaken the nusach. So comes along the Rosh, and he says, "Lo matzinu shitchatsha bracha." What does that mean? In Bechorot, he gives one insight to this. That number one, the Kohen's not doing a mitzvah, and then the second there is, even if you want to say it's a little bit of a mitzvah, he's not the main player over here. He's not the one doing the mitzvah. It's the Avia Ben. And he makes a bracha val pidyon ben, like a brachot over lasiyatan. You want the Kohen to be mechad? You want to be mechadish a bracha for a Kohen? So the Rosh is talking pidyon ben because you're being mechadish a new bracha from the beginning, something that's not written in the Torah. You're being mechadish a new bracha. Mashe enkein, something like asher tzag egos, the boel, he is doing the mitzvah of be'ilat betula. There's a big shevach over there. So the geonim berov hadrat geunutam understood that it's not ra'ui to make a bracha in that instance, but not something that doesn't have a siba. And that's what the Rosh understood. It's not enough of a siba in Pinyan Ben. The truth is, the Rambam in Teshuvot in Pe'er Ador. Listen to this. The Rambam in Pe'er Ador writes in Siman Kuf Chavtet. He argues on Birkat HaBitulim. He says, "Brachasu hari bracha levatala bli safek, ki hu davar meguneh." ולא ידעתי למה יזדוע, למה תקראו הבא קידוש וקוראים אותה קדוש בתולים. אין לך דבר מגונה מזה. It's disgusting, he says. But he doesn't say that you can't be metaken a bracha שלא תקראו חז"ל. He doesn't agree that there's enough a sibat achiyuv to do it. Which, by the way, even though Shulchan Aruch was posek to do the birkat tzagegos, the Rav Ovadia in Tarat HaBayit says Safek Berachot Lakel not to do the brachat tzagegos. But I think according to Moroccans, we have the Shitat HaShulchan Aruch. Why would we say Safek Berachot Le'akel over here? I don't understand why we would say Safek Berachot Le'akel. Saw somebody bring that down as well. I don't have a raya to it. But it's like status quo. Why would we go against the Shulchan Aruch? Okay. Now, this leads us to understand the shita of the Shulchan Aruch as well. Because in Hilchot Berachot Siman Mem Vav, the Shulchan Aruch writes. Very famous psak, the bracha that we say every morning. Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hanoten la'ayev koach. Maran HaShulchan Aruch writes not to make this bracha. You know that? In the Bet Yosef he says, I don't understand. It's a beautiful thing maybe, but who has the koach? Why to start being mechadesh a bracha? Why would you be mechadesh a bracha? And the Divrei Shulchan Aruch is a pele, because a few seifim later, Sheasani kirtsono, which was also not written in Chazal, he agrees that you can make the bracha. And Yiruei Nenu, in Bet Yosef he brings, he doesn't say against it. Baruch She'amar, it's not written in Chazal. As a matter of fact, the Pri Chadash in Siman Mem Aleph is very consistent. Pri Chadash was very consistent. You never make a bracha. He says, Noten la'ayev koach, She'asani kirtsono, Baruch She'amar. They were not found in Chazal. We don't do this bracha. But the Shulchan Aruch held by Yiruei Nenu, yes. By Asher Tzagegos Began Eden, yes. By the bracha of Kriyat Shema Lamita, yes. By Borei Nefashot is not written. Okay, there maybe you could say it's written in Yerushalmi, even that's not clear. Kriyat Shema Lamita, you make a bracha. So the Shulchan Aruch clearly held many instances where you make a bracha. So what's pshat? The answer is when there's enough of siba. Anything that's part of tefillah, like by Yiruei Nenu, there was a siba that make it part of tefillah. Kriyat Shema Lamita, there was a reason you're being mafkid neshama. Hanoten nesech bina. My dear friend Rav Yosef Peretz wrote a ma'amar about this in Pirya Ito. He brought up a very good point. Men already say shelo asani isha. So there's a sibat bracha already in place. So that the woman replaces shasani kirtsono, that they could do. That we have the reshut. The actual nusach we could play around with. When we know for sure by shasani kirtsono there was a siba, because my men say it, so why not women? So anoten la'ayev koach, Maran HaShulchan Aruch held there wasn't enough of a reason. But over here, shasani kirtsono, there is a reason. I know I'm bringing you by many places, but I just wanted to bring a yesod over here. I think it highlights a very important psak halacha. What's the bottom line? Halacha lema'aseh. So if you open up in the Shulchan Aruch Siman Mem Vav, Maran says not to make a bracha natan la'ayef koach, and Maran says to do she'asani kirtsono. The common psak by Sfaradim Edut HaMizrach is the opposite. We do, the Edut HaMizrach do hanoten la'ayef koach, because the Arizal said that should be done. And they don't do she'asani kirtsono. Rabbi Shalom Mesas, in Shebesh Umagen Chelek Daled and in other places, he was a very big supporter of the Shita that Moroccans don't do hanoten la'ayef koach b'shem u'malchut. He says Maran held this way, and even though the Arizal held otherwise, we go like Maran, and that's it. Many Moroccan Poskim argued, they say in Marrakesh they did it. Rav Yoshua Maman says he never saw people saying it without Shemu Malchut. Because that's an exception. That since the Arizal said to say it, that trumps the Shulchan Aruch. When Shulchan Aruch says not to say it, Arizal says to say it, we'll do like the Arizal. As a matter of fact, the Pri Chadash himself says in Yerushalayim, the Mikubalim say Anoten Lev Koach, and there are Yechidim that don't, and I'm one of those Yechidim. Because he was the Shitato, that you don't make a bracha, shelo tiknu bo hazal. But Edut HaMizrach, and I think most Moroccans nowadays, I for sure do, you make the bracha Anoten Lev Koach. But she'asani kirtsono, here it's funny. So according to Rabbi Shalom Misas, you don't do Anoten Lev Koach, and you do she'asani kirtsono like the Shulchan Aruch. Edut HaMizrach, the opposite. I think nowadays the common psak for Moroccans should be Anoten Lev Koach. That's what most people say, like the Arizal, because we do the Arizal. But we also do she'asani kirtsono, because that's written in Dat Maran. So this is an important point, that the Berachot are not things that just because there was one opinion, therefore you wipe it across the map. We didn't find that in Chachmei HaMa'arav. In Chachmei HaMa'arav, they were big believers in following Shulchan Aruch. Nowadays, there are some poskim that'll say in scenarios, Savei Berachot Lakel, but really each case legufo shel inyan. And to say if you found one or two shitot, we definitely didn't follow. And even if it was a Safek Shakul, you have to know each case. Some cases we will follow Neto Maran, and definitely the psak was always much more that way as well. All right? Chazaku Baruch.